Snow comes down like a verdict over Seoul, flat, relentless, white on white. The city's lights blur into halos, taxis hiss through slush, and the clinic's glass doors fog with the heat of life inside. Dr. Miho steps out into that silence with the same posture he takes into every room, hands in pockets, jaw set, a coat buttoned against both weather and sentiment. He has saved lives, yes. He has bought hospitals and an island of influence that hums with him at its center. He has built a perfect defense against anything that might require him to soften. He is used to being needed for brief, efficient things, diagnoses, decisions, signatures. He is not used to being needed in the slow, human way that requires staying. That is the line he has drawn around himself for years, sharp as ice, clear as the breath he expels into the air. A shape lies half hidden at the curb, a dark smear in the snow. For a moment he mistakes it for a discarded coat, or a man who'd slept off a night of too much. Then the gloved hand, the hair against the asphalt, and the way the body breathes shallow, he knows the language of danger. He drops his bag without thinking. The snow sings under his boots. He kneels and kneels again, professional detachment flicking on even as his fingers check a pulse, tilt a chin, watch for the lift of a chest. He has faced trauma in sterile rooms with monitors and algorithms that predict the fall of a body. He has not practiced cold hands on a stranger under sodium street lamps. She is light under the white, a young woman with dark skin already frosted at the edges, eyelashes silvered where snowflake dusted. Thin coat, threadbare gloves, a backpack flattened beneath her. He tucks a gloved hand beneath her shoulders, gathers her to him, the way someone might gather a child from a roadside. There's a smallness to her in this moment, but no plea on her face, only something close to dignity, as if even unconscious she rejects humiliation. He carries her in, as he has carried other salvations, through the clinic's automatic doors, into the wash of fluorescent that betrays no tenderness, but knows how to keep someone alive. Staff glance up from the intake desk, recognition sliding like a thermometer. Miho barked the triage numbers into a nurse's ear, stripped snow from her hair, and ordered warmth. He barely registers the inconvenience. Late-hour disruptions are part of what he buys with his time, until the clinical ledger reminds him of another of his rules. Those who can pay, pay. He has not liked unpaid obligations. He has watched debt erode institutions. He has watched charity buckle when it bends. She wakes to the blare of machines calibrated to life. There is white ceiling, a smear of harsh light. For a beat, she searches for a language to call the world by. Then a face peers down at her, austere and precise, and she knows immediately who he is. He is the man who owns the building, the man whose portrait looks out from the boardroom wall. He is the man who does not smile. "Where are you from?" he asks, not unkindly but with the efficiency of someone collecting data. "Nigeria," she says, voice small but clear. Her English is careful, a melody shaped by other tongues and education. "I'm student." Miho's face does not soften. He looks at her file as if it will explain the anomaly. Why here? Why now? Snow, he notes. No medical insurance entry he recognizes, no emergency contact. A name written by cold lips, Maria Ease. He nods, the kind of nod that translates to business. "We'll stabilize you. There will be a fee." Her face shifts. She is young, but she is not a child. Maria's jaw sets with the way people set their faces when they refuse to beg. The word fee hangs between them like a cudgel. His reaction is an old muscle memory of distance, money as boundary, as clearing brush. She breathes through the thought and shakes her head. "I don't want your charity," she says. "I can work." There are many ways to refuse help. She chooses the one that keeps her dignity. Miho studies her for a long second. Her hands, the calluses of someone who holds groceries, the ink of notes in a composition book tucked under the mattress. He is not moved, at least not visibly. He signs a form with a precision that could be mistaken for cruelty. "Work," he says. "We have positions." It is a contract, a neat legal solution. He wants no mess of gratitude or attachment. He wants an accounting, a ledger that will balance and keep compassion at arm's length. He does not realize that in asking her to balance the books, he is handing her the key to the very place he thought he had sealed. After the first morning, after coffee that tastes of burnt industry, and a tray of hospital eggs she eats standing in a corner because shifts start on time here, and she cannot lose minutes, Maria accepts a scrub top and a name tag that says Maria. She prefers it worn to being spoken about, the physical badge anchoring her to something other than weather or charity. She learns to fold sheets, to label samples, to take vitals with hands that remember being steady from holding other people up. Outside, the snow keeps falling the way snow falls when a city is made to forget warmth. Inside, the clinic moves through a predictable choreography, patients, charts, close-cropped conversations. The staff notice her quickness, a hand that arranges, a mouth that hums low under her breath. They notice her accent. They notice the way her laugh is spare. For some, it is curiosity. For others, an excuse. Hannah is one of the others. A nurse with a mouth like a clamped file and a hierarchy that begins and ends with appearance, she watches the new girl with a mixture of suspicion and entitlement, as if the world is a scale and Maria has cheated. She is part of a cluster of staff who believe in rules, in who belongs in which room and under which light. They whisper, a small flat storm of questions and assumptions. Where's she from? Student visa? How long will she take to pay back the hospital? Their voices are small but persistent. Gossip insinuates itself into the rhythm of the place. Maria hears it. She pretends not to. Pride can be practiced. She is practiced. When Hannah leaves a stack of new gowns in an unhelpful place, one more deliberate slight, Maria rearranges them with a silent patience that looks, in another setting, like humility. In this place, it reads like competence. Miho watches, behind the slatted glass of his office, a figure in a suit that has been tailored like armor. He watches because noticing is his best tool, sharper than most people's kindness. He has a file of every staff complaint, every rising star, every misstep. Maria's file is small at the moment. An intake note, a nursing observation. He watches the way she moves, economical, precise. He watches the way she hums under her breath, a tune he cannot place. An ornamental thread he finds himself following. He does not know why the sound unsettles him. When he leans on a grandfather clock of his own time, appointments ticking, the city outside a low roar, he thinks of order. Maria's small disruptions should be negligible, yet they accumulate in the place that is always kept cold to prevent sentimentality from seeping in. She works evenings and mornings around classes. She studies in the staff break room between shifts under a lamp that throws a paper map of her textbook into the air like a white flag. Her mother back home called often and sang the same lullaby through a dropped call made of words about patience and about seeds that take time to break. Maria has brought that song with her. Sometimes she hums it while she wipes a counter, a private litany that steadies. The work is honest and it pays in part. She keeps the ledger in her head. Transport, food, part of the school fee. There are nights when the bus runs empty and her hands go numb from cold, and she still opens the composition book and writes, "Tomorrow, keep going." There is pride threaded through the exhaustion. She chosen to stand rather than be selected by pity. Her presence begins to shift the quiet calculations of the clinic. Little things happen that are so small as to be invisible to anyone but someone looking for the seams. An extra blanket folded and left at a patient's bedside with Maria's handwriting on the tag. A cup of tea placed by a recovering old man who smiles as if remembering his mother. The gestures are not loud, but they carry weight in a place that measures weight in vitals. There are other things Miho notices that he would not admit to anyone. The way Maria keeps her bag close even while she makes rounds. The small chipped pattern on her mug she uses in the break room. The red thread of a nickname stitched inside her coat. He watches a woman who, if he is honest with himself, seems to carry an unseen gravity, not heavy in sorrow but in presence. He does not like presence that insists on being felt. At first, his attention is clinical. He catalogues, reliable, punctual, careful. Then, without a fanfare, he would have noticed in himself at a younger age, he finds himself moving the meetings on his calendar so that he can pass through the corridor where Maria stacks sanitized trays. He tells himself he enjoys the order of the place, that routines must be overseen. But his visits stretch longer. He lingers in doorways for a second that has the temperature of allowance. Hannah sees it and narrows her eyes. "Why is he there again?" she mutters to a colleague. Not that he's around without reason. Maybe he likes how she folds, the colleague says, half joking, and their smiles are knives. One afternoon, a patient's son storms through the waiting room upset about the cost of a procedure and starts to raise his voice. Hospital tension tends to follow a predictable arc. Miho watches from a distance, the way commanders watch a sea before deciding a course. Someone needs to step in to redirect the narrative back to calm. He could pay the bill himself, sign the paperwork to soothe the moment without changing the ledger. Instead, he watches Hannah edge forward, mouth already open. He sees the dip in Maria's shoulders as she prepares to retreat from the storm. Then something in him, something harder to name than policy, happens. He walks across the floor, a long, purposeful stride that makes heads turn. "Sir," Hannah says, half to him and half to the room, as if his presence will complicate her authority. He stands between the son and the small woman on the bed, between impatience and the thin thread of decency. He speaks, voice tempered but firm. "We will handle this with dignity," he says, and something in the room reorders itself, as if at once the concept of dignity becomes a law. Hannah bristles, coloring with a small anger at being denied her narrative. The patient's son stutters. A nurse calls for a form. In the hush, Maria looks up at Miho, startled. She is not used to being defended by the man who writes off unpaid care as a line item. She has only seen him in the guise that says, "Do not soften." Later, alone with a chart in his office, Miho finds himself replaying the gesture. He tells himself he acted to preserve hospital order, nothing more than that. Standardization of conflict for operational efficiency. Still, when he closes his eyes, he sees Maria's face in the pool of corridor light as if the image is a thing he could place on a shelf and take down like a book. There are nights when Seoul feels like a chest of mirrors. He has learned to avoid reflections because they show the wrong angles. He has learned to organize affection into the neat rows of business investments rather than trust anyone with the messy inventory of feelings. His father's voice hums in the back of his skull at unpredictable times, a reminder about duty, a reminder that weakness is a luxury. The father's letters come on embossed paper that smells faintly of smoke and money. They are not warm. For Maria, the clinic is a room that both mends and exposes. She learns linoleum floors the way a sailor learns the run of the deck, by touch, by rhythm. She builds a map of the building in her head, the pantry with its solitary packet of decaf, the supply closet with aspirin tucked behind gauze, the tiny window in the staff bathroom that lets in a strip of pale light. She maps also the personality of each room. The pediatric wing smells of crayons and plastic hope. The administrative floor smells of polished wood and invisible measures. There are private victories. The first time she manages to calm a child who refuses to take medicine, she walks out into the stairwell and lets the cold find that place in her chest that had tightened in the past month. The first time a professor at the university asks after her studies and nods in approval, she writes a line in her composition book, "One more step." Outside, snow softens the city into anonymity. Inside, feeling begins to form in small, precise notes. Miho brings her a takeaway coffee one morning without fanfare, placing it on the counter with an efficiency that could pass for kindness. It is the kind of action he can justify. He notices someone skipping breakfast. An attentive hospital director ensures staff well-being. Maria accepts it with a nod, more surprised than pleased. The coffee is black and bitter, and just enough to push away the tremor of dawn. He does not offer more. He does not ask about her childhood or her mother's songs. He keeps his glance measured. But one night, he passes her in the stairwell, and she is singing under her breath, a lullaby thin as thread, language curling like steam. There is a line in it that repeats, a memory of a town he cannot name. He stops, though he knows better, the sound catching in him like a small foreign key. "You should sleep," he says, the words clipped. He offers her a spare blanket from his office because apparently he keeps such items in case of emergency. His hands are steady as he drapes it over her shoulders, a gesture orchestrated to avoid sentimentality. She thanks him with a single syllable. That night, the blanket is the map of a decision. She tucks it under her chin and reads until the lamp grows dim. Rumors are a weather of their own. Electronic chatter between staff chat rooms and closed circles of gossip begin to weave a pattern. The billionaire doctor who never lets himself be touched by sentiment has been seen on the hallway. It is the kind of story that deliciously contradicts the man's self-image. Miho pays the chatter no mind. He is too accustomed to the hum of control. Yet the idea of someone speaking of him in the same breath as kindness is an unfamiliar weight. The snow thickens, and with it the small accidents. The city's slick surfaces make life precarious. A delivery truck slides at an intersection and nearly clips a queue of pedestrians. Maria, carrying a stack of records, loses her footing. It could be an ordinary thing. People slip, people recover, but it happens in a place that is heavy with him. He is there when the world tilts, as if the tilt aligns with his own private axis. He reaches for her, and it is neither dramatic nor tender, it is practical. He steadies her with a firm hand that grips the elbow and an arm that catches the weight of a stack of patient files. Her scarf comes loose in the motion, a long thin thing that unspools and catches on a lamppost. Snow lands on the fabric like an accusation, stitches of cold accumulating. He notices the fraying at the scarf's edge, a detail no one else would look for. He wraps it around her neck with a brusque care, an action that speaks more than his words ever do. She moves closer to him in the press of bodies and the heat of the moment. The proximity is a new thing, a hummed frequency in an orchestra he thought he'd never hear. Some people would call that proximity an opening. For Miho, it is an error to be corrected. He withdraws with a motion that is practiced to avoid giving room for misunderstanding. He is not unmindful of the power differential, how a touch from him is recorded like a line in a ledger where meanings are given value. He keeps his hand where it can be seen, on the surface, neutral as an instrument. Maria, for her part, meets the touch with neither surrender nor offense. It is a practical warmth, hands that save her, hands that place a scarf against freezing air. She thanks him quietly. He nods and steps back into his role, a man who can be counted on when practicalities demand. But the city keeps a different accounting. People see what they want and what they fear. Hannah sees an opportunity to agitate a line that suits her. She's getting special treatment, she says one afternoon to a small group at the nurse's station. Her tone is sharp enough to leave a bruise. Maybe there are quotas now. The murmurs swell. They measure Maria by the wrong standard, what she receives rather than what she gives. The clinic, impregnable as it looks, has the same human anatomy as any place. Soft spots, places where jealousy and fear can root. Miho hears the whispers, though he tries not to. He also hears faintly the song of the lullaby that Maria hums while stacking syringes. He hears it because it slips through the noise like a thermometer through a wall. It takes time for a man like him to admit that he cares what happens in the small hours to someone he barely knows. It takes longer to confess that he notices the way she moves with economy, like someone who learned to make do without fanfare. One evening, a patient with a chronic condition arrives and begins to deteriorate. The team moves into motion, beyond the ledger, beyond taste, doing the work that requires only hands and knowledge and presence. Maria is efficient in the chaos. She acts, fetches, holds a tray, as if she knows exactly where and when the man needs a load lifted. She talks softly to him as he struggles, voice even and steady, offering reassurance without pity. The scene is a small revolt against the way the world wants to divide people into categories. It is the theater of competence. Miho stands at the foot of the bed and watches the way her fingers avoid being rough. He has seen gentle. He has distributed it by committee and by press release. He has not often watched it being done for its own sake, for the sake of the person beneath the hands. He feels an unfamiliar tug at the membrane that separates him from other people. There is an exchange then, not dramatic, not cinematic in the way editors sometimes like it to be, but true. Hannah makes a crack about loyalty, about how the clinic is a machine and how machines have no room for sentimentality. Another nurse laughs. The sound is brittle. The patient's son, who had been riled earlier, watches the quiet competence and then looks at Miho with a flicker of gratitude. Without quite meaning to, Miho finds himself answering for a woman he barely knows. "We need staff who can keep a level head," he says, and the words do not seem to be his attempt at an apology. They are a choice. The room stills. Gossip disperses like smoke. That night he returns to his office with the taste of the day on his tongue like a medicine. He has not sworn to a new life. He has not written down the moment as a turning point. Yet, like all serious changes, it begins with small practicalities. Outside, the flakes keep falling and street lamps make halos. Inside, the clinic warms as bodies populate its rooms with the steady heat of needing and helping. There is an undercurrent in both of them now, an unspoken calculus that runs parallel to schedules and bills. Proximity breeds pain and possibility in equal measure. For Maria, the clinic becomes a crucible of self-invention. There are nights when she returns to her tiny boarding room with its single window to the alleys of Seoul and writes letters she cannot send. Lists of things she must do to make school fees and rent a line. Her mother's voice arrives in the small hour, full of prayer and scolding and song. The lullaby remains a constant. She hums it for herself like a ritual before sleep, a tether to a life that is far across the ocean yet persistent in her chest. She does not tell anyone about the way she once wanted to be a teacher back home, about the crowded library where she spent afternoons losing herself in books older than she is. She does not tell them about the reason she left Nigeria, the thin opportunity of a scholarship, the quiet insistence of a mother who wanted her daughter to have room to breathe. She calls those memories up in private like artifacts in a case. They are both fragile and durable. For Miho, the space between appointments grows to have texture. He finds himself making rounds not from obligation but from curiosity. He notices the small way Maria ties a bandage, the angle of her fingers as she writes a note. He watches the way patients lean toward her voice. He does not name his feeling. He rarely names anything beyond efficiency. He files it under observation, a clinical symptom, and yet it lingers like a scent. The city, unredeemable and persistent, produces a storm one night that makes the transit system groan. Commuters crowd the clinic lobby seeking warmth, shelter, a chair. Maria mans the intake desk with practiced calm, handing out numbers, making room. Hannah hovers near a corner like a judge waiting for verdict. A man arrives with a child coughing and the weather makes the path treacherous. He slips on the clinic steps, clutching his child, and a small chaos ensues. Maria reaches for the child before a nurse can arrive. She takes the coughing child into her arms, lulls him with a voice that is soft as a blanket. In the crush, a man's scarf hits the floor and Miho stoops to pick it up. His fingers brush hers as he hands it over, an accidental holding that is neither requested nor refused. Something about the contact is clear and sudden. It is ordinary, a simple transfer of items. But the way her fingers curl around his hand feels like an afterimage of something he left behind years ago, an ease that has the potential to thaw edges. Later, when the clinic empties and the alarms quiet, Miho makes a choice that even he would not have predicted. He calls security to ensure that Maria's night route home is safe. It is a small, pragmatic step, and yet it contains a quiet admission that the world needs watching, and that sometimes he will watch it. He keeps the evening's ledger neat, a record saved, an action justified. He does not tell anyone about the way he stayed by the window long after the security call was made, watching a dark dot toast itself against the snow until it is swallowed by distance. That night, he dreams of a corridor he once walked with his father. His father's voice is not loud, but it is precise. To be weak is to risk losing everything. He had taken the words as a map, and life had followed the lines. He had learned to build walls where others build bridges, to calculate and to withhold. Love, in his vocabulary, had been a liability. But storms shift, and inside the clinic, the map of Miho's life begins to show new routes. He begins to notice what he had convinced himself not to. The way a small spoon of kindness can recalibrate who a person is when given without show. He keeps his own counsel, his movements measured, but the architecture of his decisions is changing like tectonic plates. Slow, nearly invisible, but indubitably real. Days move into a rhythm of small rituals, patients that arrive and leave like migratory birds, staff meetings with their familiar tension points, Maria folding towels with an almost ceremonial devotion. Her life is a mosaic of classes, shifts, and the occasional phone call home peppered with laughter. Mine is a life measured by metrics, not melodies. There is a moment, a single beat that will be reread later as the hinge, when a delivery truck loses control on a slick road near the clinic and careens toward an elderly woman crossing the street. Time compresses, a squeal of brakes, doors flung open, a chorus of alarmed voices. Miho moves first, the reflex of a surgeon who knows the calculus of seconds. He pushes the woman aside with an arm that takes the impact, throwing up his shoulder to break the fall. He ends up on his knees in the snow, a bruise forming on his hip where the pavement was unkind. Maria dives toward the same scene, sleeves rolled, scarf flapping, eyes bright with the term that frames her life. Do. She reaches Miho as he steadies the woman, and together they help the old woman to a bench. The scarf that had earlier been wrapped around Maria's neck now rests in Miho's gloved fingers. He lifts his gaze to her, and for the first time there is something like uncalculated gratitude in his eyes. She smiles without show, an expression that is part survived and part grateful. She is not delicate, she is fortitude in a thin coat. Around them, people collect themselves like driftwood. Someone calls an ambulance, someone else claps a blanket over the elderly woman's knees. They stand there in the snow, a man with a bruise and a woman with a frayed scarf, breathing in the cold that has a way of making hearts speak without words. For a moment, no one whispers about belonging or status. The moment is too plain for the world's old divisions. The clinic's door swings and closes behind the small crowd as if the building is a lung expelling air. Inside, stories will be told, and later retold with embellishments. Some will call it heroism, some will call it duty. For Miho and Maria, it is a shared fact. Later narrators will read it as the day an iceberg began to melt. He walks back to his office with a bruise and a new awareness lodged like a pin in his shoulder. She walks to the supply closet where Hannah will make a sour face and stoop to fold a towel with her usual precise motions. The day has given them something neither of them expected, an intersection. There are consequences to intersections in a place that prizes order over story. Whispers gather their own momentum, rumors becoming a low static that follows them up stairwells and into elevators. People begin to arrange the anecdote into the shape of scandal or wonder, depending on their appetite. Miho, who has practiced solitude like a doctrine, finds himself alternately annoyed and oddly pleased at the attention. He has not set out to be noticed for anything other than competence. Maria, who has balanced on razor-thin margins for years, feels the heat of exposure as another test. She does not crave attention, and she does not shrink from scrutiny. She continues to do her work, to take classes, to stitch the life she is building from small, honest hours. Still, there are nights when she stands at the window of her boarding room and stares at the snow that covers Seoul like a promise unkept, thinking of the man who rescued her without looking for anything in return. And there is finally an unease that cannot be measured solely by actions and ledgers. What happens when a man who has never let anyone near his heart begins to lower the shutter, if only for an inch? What happens when the person who saved him from a careless, self-built winter is herself someone he saved? The city keeps its own counsel, snow melts in its own time. Inside the clinic, small decisions accumulate like falling flakes, and together they begin to change the landscape. If this opening moved you, like and subscribe for more stories that follow the slow thaw of unexpected compassion. The quiet after the storm is not peace, it is an intermission in a longer play. In the corridor that evening, as night eats the last of the light, Miho finds Maria bent over a patient's chart, exhausted but exact. He does not call from the doorway. He steps in and returns her scarf by way of a question. "Be careful," he says simply. She looks up, and in the way she meets his gaze, there is a measure of something neither of them is ready to name. Curiosity metamorphosed into something like hope. He hears his chest respond, and cannot pinpoint the cause. Whether it is the sound of her laugh, the way she folds the blanket with trembling artistry, or the fact that she hums a lullaby that fills the corridor like a small bright thing. Outside, the snow begins again, soft and resolute. Inside, warm lights glow against the dusk. For both of them, this is the moment between the world they have known and the world that might be. The clinic hums on, machines steady and voices low. They are, for now, two figures caught in a motion that is larger than a ledger and smaller than a life, something that will require time and courage to name. A door opens and the night staff change shifts. Someone laughs at a joke that no one else hears and the sound ricochets down the hall. A patient turns in his sleep and dreams of home. The clinic breathes. The rest of the city is a blur of headlights and flurries. And somewhere inside the empty spaces, a man who made a rule of refusing anyone else's vulnerability feels, for the first time in a long time, like a person who has been offered a choice rather than an obligation. He is not yet changed. That is the point of beginning, but he is irresistibly aware of the gift of noticing someone else's humanity. Maria finishes her shift and walks toward the door. The snow has become a piano of footprints, and as she steps outside, a gust lifts white threads across the street. She wraps the scarf tighter, thinking of home, thinking of the future she won't name aloud yet. She thinks of the man who had found her in the snow and carried her to the light. Their lives are now braided in small ways. A scarf returned, a coffee left on a counter, a quiet defense in a crowded room. Each thread is an ordinary thing, a small practical kindness that does not demand a story. But the accumulation of ordinary things is what builds quiet revolutions. As she walks away, Miho watches from the window. He sees her silhouette against the city and imagines the warmth of a life unmeasured by account books. He does not know how to get there. He only knows that something in him has been unbalanced by a presence that refuses to be polished into a trophy. The snow falls. The night is deep. The clinic lights hold a small pool of warmth against the cold that lies beyond. Inside that light, two people carry on with their work, their study, their choices. For now the ledger remains. Ledgers favor description over prophecy, but a margin has begun to appear at the edge of his life, and in that margin, the possibility of change sits like a small growing ember. Weeks accumulate like careful stitches. Days that once fit into the neat columns of Miho's schedule begin to carry soft, illegible margins. He continues to move through the clinic as he always has, decisions measured, expressions economical. But his attention no longer rests only on charts. He notices the tiny ways Maria arranges a bedside bouquet to protect a patient's throat, the way she wipes a child's tear and does not look away afterward. He finds himself arriving earlier, not for inspections but to watch the light catch in the exact hairline of the corridor where she passes. For Maria, the work is still work, hours to fill, tuition to pay, a life being stitched together by small payments and strict timetables. But there are also small privileges that prick at the edges of her days. A tray left with a sandwich when she returns from an exam, a message on a post-it, good shift, tucked into her locker, a folder in the staff room with extra hours assigned to her so she can take an important exam. None of those are declarations of devotion. They are incremental rearrangements of someone's day to make room for another. Their closeness grows as such things do, not in theatrics, but in detail. They share the same bench during an overlong rain when the bus schedules conspire against tired bodies. He offers an umbrella he had purchased for convenience. She tucks it between her legs and hums a phrase of the lullaby she carries in a pocket of memory. He listens to the pattern without understanding the words and feels, for the first time in years, like an outsider invited into a private language. He brings her gloves one morning, plain thermal gloves the hospital bought for staff, that fit her hands like a small apology. She accepts them without dramatics and wears them while grading flashcards after the midnight shift. There are awkwardities too. Power differences live in the silence between them. The way his name clears a hallway, the way she signs for pay stubs and counts money under fluorescent lights. At staff gatherings, some people still lean into narrative with an edge. Hannah, whose suspicion has hardened into a kind of combative pride, does not relent. She makes a barb about charity hires at a union of nurses, and the echo is sharp. People laugh too quickly. Maria's cheeks flush with the strain of not answering in kind. She simply folds napkins with hands that have learned to steady conflict into work. Miho sees so much, the whispering, the forced jokes, the small humiliations. At times he wonders what keeps him in the clinic beyond the obligations he built into his life. He knows clinically that harboring a stranger's need is a risk to his pattern. He also knows that the fact of her persistence, her routine of coming and doing the small invisible tasks, means something that cannot be quantified on a balance sheet. One night, a rare lull presses on the clinic. Few patients, and the hum of machines like the ocean at a distance. Maria remains, grading on a clipboard under a desk lamp, eyelids heavy, the lullaby threading the room as she hums to herself. Miho lingers in the doorway, the corridor light making his profile a straight rule. He crosses the distance between them without a ceremony and sits on the opposite chair. "You should sleep," he says, and the words are both admonition and care. She looks up, surprised, then closes the notebook with a soft apology for dozing. The conversation that follows is not confessional at first. It is practical. A question about a textbook, a comment on a technique. But small things are how trust is grown. He tells her about a lecture he will never attend. She tells him about a professor who pushed her to do a study on community health access. He listens as if the things she says matter beyond their utility. When the heavier question comes, why she keeps going despite hardship, she answers with the steady logic of someone who has internalized dignity. My mother said opportunity is a seed, she says. You water it even when you think it will not grow. He hears the stubborn architecture in her voice and realizes how rarely anyone used that sort of language with him. He nods, and in the nod there is less business than habit. There is human response. The confession that will change everything does not come as a scene out of a romance novel. It is night, the clinic quiet, a single lamp casting a yellow circle over a desk where files make small hills. Miho is not rehearsed. He is watching a patient's chart when his hand pauses and the silence gathers shape. He speaks, halting because these are not the tools with which he builds businesses. I have rules, he says. I have always thought they kept people safe and myself intact. I measured out affection like currency. It was rational. Maria folds her hands into her lap and looks at him with a kind of careful attention that has always been his mirror. It is safer to count what you can measure, she says, but people are not numbers. The way she says it does not chastise in a sermon, rather, it explains as someone who has learned the argument by living through it. He exhales, a small sound like a door closing. I did not think I would be impacted, he admits. You have been here. You have been steady. It changes the margins around my life. It makes me consider things I tuned out. There is a long, even beat where two people measure each other's breath. Then he says what he has never prepared to say aloud. I am falling, he tells her. The admission is naked because it is not grand. No sudden upheaval, no cinematic gesture. It is the honest accounting of a man who knows the meaning of responsibility and yet recognizes its limit. Maria is still. She does not laugh or deflect. She processes, not just his words, but the work they describe. The same man who signs checks, who shapes strategy, who refused to make space in his life is saying that space exists now because of her presence. She answers with equal plainness. I would be lying if I said I hadn't felt it too, she says, but I needed to be sure it was not pity I was holding. Her gaze is unwavering. Those words, pity, are a boundary she has practiced against. Consent in their confession is mutual, not fragile nor transactional. They make a small pact then, not of promises but of honesty, to name what they feel, to refuse to let their positions become the shorthand for their relationship, to move forward in public with integrity. He offers her no sweeping changes to her immigration status, no overblown guarantees. He offers his attention, his choice, and his willingness to defend her. It becomes necessary very soon to make that defense public. The gala that happens a month later is a place where reputations are polished. Investors and partners gather under lights that make glassware look like polished thought. Miho's father attends as he always does, impeccable suit, the scent of money as a background. He has opinions on everything, and he expects his son to reflect them like a carefully mirrored surface. For weeks there has been a current. Board members whispering about the rumor of the relationship, colleagues questioning whether sentiment will affect operations. Miho knows these whispers. He knows the father's tastes. Nothing personal that could compromise the family's legacy. On stage, before a crowd assembled to laud the clinic's expansion plans, Miho takes the microphone. He could make a speech about numbers, about expansion, about the fiscal health of a system that feeds his father's ambitions. Instead, he speaks about dignity. He tells the room about a nurse who taught him a simple lesson, that giving someone a blanket could shift the arc of their day. He speaks, without naming names at first, of a staff member who runs herself ragged for the sake of patients, of someone who instills quiet warmth into routine. Then he does something no one had rehearsed for. He introduces Maria, not as an anecdote but as an equal, and he asks her to come forward. There is a small hush as she steps out from the rows of staff, the lullaby loose at the corner of her smile. He does not dramatize, he credits her work. He announces a new initiative, a program to formalize sponsorships and mentorships for staff who are also students, to make the clinic a training ground for people who have no other place to learn. The plan will redirect some discretionary funds toward education and community outreach. It is reasonable, operationally sound, and it is also a deliberate redistribution of privilege. Miho's father does not hide his displeasure. He stands in the wings like a statue that has learned to move its mouth. His face is a ledger with a thick line carved through it, a visible displeasure, then words sharp enough to be used as currency. He corners his son after the event, in a private room with the perfume of financing in the air, and asks him why he would squander the optics of a merger for what he dismisses as sentimental charity. Miho answers plainly. "Dignity matters," he says. "It is good for people, it is good for the clinic. I do not want to sacrifice what we do for what looks profitable today." His father's anger is direct. "You will ruin what our family built," he spits. "We do not have the luxury of sentimentality. You will cut ties and you will regret it." Miho listens for a long second. He thinks of the charts and the memos and the nights he counted out numbers to measure risk. He also thinks of a woman who hums a lullaby in the corner of a staff room, who refuses pity and insists on work, and whose laugh has started to smooth the furrows in his own expression. He makes a choice no longer quietly. It is a measured decision placed like a coin on a scale. If choosing to build people instead of maximizing this quarter's margins is what it takes to be true to this place, I accept the consequence, he says. The words are neither grandstanding nor naive, they are a measured posture. The father reacts with something older than anger, betrayal. He tells Miho he will withdraw support, cut ties, and that a son who chooses such folly forfeits inheritance. The father storms out, the door closing on the sound of his disapproval like a gavel. For a time the clinic trembles with small instability. A few investors withdraw their enthusiasm. The board is brusque in memos. Miho's choices necessitate skillful rearrangements of funding. He takes the brunt personally. The burden is real, and Maria feels it as well. A guilt that settles in her chest because the price of their truth comes with consequences that touch everyone at the clinic. She wants to shield him, to offer herself as a buffer against the family's retaliation, but Miho refuses. "You are not a shield," he says. "You are my equal." It is the kind of sentence that does not recreate old debts. It recalibrates the power in the room. They weather the difficulties together, not with tidy triumphs, but with steady will. When Hannah grows loud with petty spite, Miho does not remove her from the conversation, but he does make the political standing clear. Disruptive gossip will not shape policy. He asks the staff to commit to unity and to let competence speak. Time and small, sincere work eventually begin to wash at the hardened attitudes, even his father's. The man who once valued only results finds himself inexorably encountering the unexpected evidence of what his son's choices produce. A few weeks after the quarrel, the father, practical and not prone to theatrics, does something unplanned. He sends his longtime driver, an older man with a chronically sore back, to the clinic for an assessment. The driver, who has known Miho since the son's youth, is stooped but steady. Maria is assigned to assist on the day of his consultation. She moves with the same calm competence she has used 100 times and treats the man with no awareness of his employer's identity.